My name is Greg Thompson, and I once thought I led a charmed life in the picturesque town of Maplewood. Nestled between lush hills and sparkling lakes, Maplewood was the kind of place where neighbors greeted you with warm smiles and everyone seemed to know each other. I had a job I loved as a graphic designer for a local marketing firm, and a home that I had poured my heart and soul into renovating. But the crown jewel of my life was my wife, Sarah. Sarah was everything I could have ever asked for: beautiful, intelligent, and driven. We met in college, where we bonded over our shared love for art and creativity. She had a contagious laugh that could brighten the darkest of days and a passion for life that inspired everyone around her. We married 3 years ago, and I still remember the blissful day we exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other through thick and thin. After settling into our cozy two-bedroom house, we began to build a life filled with laughter, dreams, and plans for the future. But as the months passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. At first, it was a feeling I brushed aside: the late nights at work, the sudden need for personal space, and the occasional phone call she rushed to take in another room. But as time went on, the nagging doubts grew into a gnawing suspicion that I could no longer ignore. One brisk autumn evening, I returned home from work earlier than usual, eager to surprise Sarah with her favorite takeout. As I walked through the front door, a sense of unease hung in the air like a heavy fog. The house was unusually quiet, and as I listened intently, I heard muffled voices coming from our bedroom. My heart raced as I crept closer, drawn by an inexplicable urge to know what was happening. I stood outside the door, my heart pounding, straining to make sense of the words I barely caught. It was then that I heard it: Sarah's voice, soft yet intimate, speaking to someone else. I leaned in closer, and the name that slipped from her lips sent a jolt through my entire being: Jake. In that moment, the ground beneath me seemed to shift. Jake was a guy from her office, someone I met at a party months prior. A charming guy with a disarming smile, the kind of guy who could easily draw anyone in. I thought nothing of him then, but now he was at the center of my worst fears. I staggered back from the door, my mind racing as the pieces fell into place. The late nights, the secretive calls, the distance that had crept into our relationship. I had turned a blind eye, hoping it was just stress from work or the usual ebb and flow of marriage. But no, it was worse. Much worse. My heart was heavy with betrayal as I tried to process what I had just overheard. My world, once filled with color and joy, now felt gray and hollow. I didn't know how long I stood there, frozen in disbelief. The voice of my wife, my partner, the woman I loved, was mingling with another man. I was left standing in the shadows, grappling with the reality of the life I thought we had built together. What would I do next? I thought about confronting her right then and there, but a wave of instincts told me to hold back. I needed to think clearly. I needed a plan, a way to deal with this betrayal that didn't involve an explosive confrontation. I decided then that I would turn this pain into something else, something more potent than sorrow. I would make her understand the depth of her betrayal, not through anger, but through a calculated plan of revenge that would leave no stone unturned. This was just the beginning. The days that followed my eavesdropping were a blur, filled with a turbulent mix of emotions. Anger simmered beneath the surface, but I kept my cool as I went about my daily routine. I would sit at the dining table, across from Sarah, and force myself to engage in light conversation as if nothing had changed. I could see the innocence in her eyes, blissfully unaware that I held the secret that would shatter her world. As I watched her go about her life, I meticulously planned my next steps. I felt like a detective on the case of a lifetime, piecing together the clues of her infidelity. Each day I left for work at the same time, but I had started to take longer routes home, hopping to catch her in the act again. I wanted to gather concrete evidence, something more than just a fleeting conversation overheard through a door. One evening I decided to take a different approach. I called in sick to work, telling my boss I had the flu. This gave me the opportunity to stay home and observe Sarah without her knowing. I knew she had a meeting scheduled that afternoon, and if Jake was involved, it would give me the chance to follow her. As I sat on the couch, my heart raced with every passing minute. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins. When I heard her getting ready, I knew my time had come. I watched from the window as she climbed into her car, her hair flowing elegantly over her shoulders. She wore that little black dress I loved, the one that hugged her curves in all the right places. But it wasn't my admiration for her beauty that filled me. It was the bitterness of betrayal. I quietly followed her, keeping a safe distance, my palms sweaty on the steering wheel. She drove to a trendy cafe on the outskirts of town, a place I had never seen her visit before. It felt like an invitation to a world I was no longer part of. I parked a few blocks away and walked to the cafe, trying to calm my racing heart. As I approached, I spotted her through the glass window, laughing and chatting animatedly. My stomach churned as I saw Jake sitting across from her, leaning forward with that same charming smile that had once made me brush him off as harmless. I found a small corner table where I could see and hear everything without being noticed. The cafe was buzzing with people, and I blended into the background, a mere shadow in the light of their laughter. I listened as they exchanged playful banter, oblivious to the storm brewing in my heart. "Can you believe we pulled off that presentation?" Sarah laughed, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Not without you, that's for sure," Jake replied, his voice dripping with flirtation. "You're the best partner I could ask for." The way she looked at him, the way her laughter flowed so freely, it twisted a knife in my gut. I realized how deep their connection ran. They weren't just colleagues, they were something more. I watched them for what felt like hours, each second amplifying my pain. I couldn't help but notice the way their hands lingered on the table or how she leaned in closer, hanging on his every word. My heart sank lower with every passing moment. After a while, they finally stood to leave. My heart raced as I scrambled to follow them without being seen. It was a delicate dance of shadows, and I felt the weight of my next move pressing heavily on my shoulders. They walked to Jake's car, and as they got closer, I heard her laugh one more time. That laughter, it was meant for me, not him. They got into his car and drove off, leaving me standing alone on the sidewalk, consumed by a whirlwind of betrayal and anguish. I had all the evidence I needed. This was no longer just a suspicion. This was real. The reality of her infidelity crashed down on me like a tidal wave, and I felt the urge to hurl something, anything, to release the pent-up anger and pain that filled my chest. I spent the evening packing around our home, grappling with the feelings of betrayal coursing through me. My mind raced with thoughts of revenge, but I knew I had to be smart about it. I couldn't confront her yet. She wouldn't understand the pain I felt. I needed to turn this into a plan, something that would show her the consequences of her actions without losing myself to reckless rage. As the night grew darker, I sat down at my desk, staring blankly at my computer screen. I began to write down my thoughts, crafting a strategy that would serve as the foundation for my revenge. The more I wrote, the clearer my path became. It wouldn't just be about making her regret her choices. It would be about making her see the reality of the relationship she had chosen over ours. I wanted to turn the tables, to unveil the truth in a way that would leave her shaken. With each word, I felt a sense of empowerment wash over me. I was no longer the victim. I was the one in control. And this was just the beginning. As the days turned into weeks, I found a singular focus on my plan for revenge. Every detail mattered, and I meticulously crafted my strategy during stolen moments when Sarah was oblivious to my internal turmoil. My heart still ached, but it had shifted from sorrow to a steely resolve. I needed to show her the consequences of her actions, to expose her betrayal in such a way that she couldn't ignore it. I began by gathering evidence. I was determined to document every interaction between Sarah and Jake. At first, it was simple. I followed them on their lunch dates, taking note of the places they frequented. I even enlisted the help of a mutual friend, Mark, a photographer who had his own suspicions about Sarah's fidelity. I told him I was working on a project that required candid shots of couples around town. He was happy to help and began snapping photos of Sarah and Jake whenever they were together, under the guise of capturing romantic moments for a supposed art exhibit. Every picture Mark sent me added more fuel to the fire of my plan. I had images of them laughing together, leaning in too close, and even one where their hands were almost touching. It was a bittersweet thrill, capturing Sarah in the act of betrayal, each snapshot reinforcing my resolve. I saved them all in a hidden folder on my laptop, ensuring that I would have undeniable proof when the time came. But I knew I needed more than just photographic evidence. I had to create a situation that would force Sarah to confront the reality of her choices. I began to think about how to manipulate circumstances so that she would feel the weight of her actions. I remembered the anniversary party we had planned for our 4th year of marriage. It was supposed to be a celebration of the love and commitment we had shared, but now it would become the perfect stage for my revenge. I decided to host the party at a local banquet hall and invite close friends and family, but I would also ensure that Jake would be there. I discreetly reached out to a few of our mutual friends, planting the idea of a grand gathering to celebrate our relationship. I spun a story of rekindling love and the importance of having everyone there to witness our commitment. Little did they know, it was all part of a much larger plan. As the days went by, I also began working on my own transformation. I started hitting the gym regularly, pushing myself harder with each session. I wanted to become the man that not only captivated Sarah when we first met, but also someone who could stand confidently in the face of her betrayal. I revamped my wardrobe, replacing old t-shirts with tailored suits and polished shoes. Each change was a step toward reclaiming my self-worth, and it felt empowering. In the weeks leading up to the party, I also began to subtly change my demeanor around Sarah. I displayed more confidence, engaging in conversations with an energy I hadn't shown in a long time. I laughed more, made spontaneous plans, and flirted with her like I used to. She noticed the shift and seemed intrigued, a hint of confusion in her eyes as I transformed into a more charismatic version of myself. It was a game of chess, and I was making calculated moves. The night of the party finally arrived, and the banquet hall was a sight to behold. I had arranged for elegant decorations, twinkling fairy lights, and a beautiful cake adorned with our names. As I stood at the entrance, greeting our guests, I felt a rush of adrenaline mixed with anticipation. I knew this was the moment I had been waiting for, the culmination of my carefully laid plans. When Sarah walked in, her expression lit up with surprise and joy. She looked stunning in a royal blue dress that accentuated her figure perfectly. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of nostalgia for who we used to be, but I quickly pushed it aside. This was not about nostalgia, this was about retribution. As the night progressed, I made sure to keep Jake close. He arrived shortly after Sarah and greeted her with a warmth that made my blood boil. I watched as they interacted, their chemistry palpable. I circulated among our friends, playing the charming husband while also planting seeds of doubt. I made subtle comments like, "Isn't it great to have everyone together again?" While catching Jake's eye. The tension was electric, and I could feel the mounting pressure closing in on Sarah. I had arranged for a slideshow of our memories to play during the party, but I had one final twist planned. Just before the slideshow began, I took a moment to address our guests. I raised my glass and thanked everyone for being there to celebrate our love. I spoke about the journey we had shared, the challenges we had faced, and how important trust and loyalty were in any relationship. I watched Sarah's expression shift from joy to uncertainty as she began to read between the lines. Then, as the slideshow began, I added a few images that would leave her speechless. The photos Mark had taken of her with Jake. They appeared on the screen, one by one, juxtaposed against the memories of our happy moments. I held my breath, watching her face as she processed the images. Confusion morphed into shock, and then into a dawning realization that she could no longer hide from the truth. The room fell silent, and the laughter faded away. I could see the color drain from Sarah's face as she recognized the betrayal laid bare before her. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment she would have to confront her infidelity head-on. As I stood there, watching the woman I had once loved crumble under the weight of her choices, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. I had achieved what I set out to do, but the aftermath was set to unravel in ways I couldn't yet predict. As the slideshow played on, the atmosphere in the banquet hall shifted dramatically. Gazes bounced between the images on the screen and Sarah's stricken face. She looked trapped, cornered by the very betrayal she had thought she could keep hidden. I could see her processing the reality of her infidelity, witnessing the shame and confusion flicker in her eyes. Then it happened. The moment I had orchestrated began to unfold. Sarah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. The room fell silent, all eyes on her as she took a step back, visibly shaken. I could see the fight-or-flight instinct battling within her. I braced myself, knowing that this was the climax of my carefully crafted revenge. "Greg, what is this?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "You set me up." "Set you up," I replied, maintaining a calm demeanor. "I didn't set you up, Sarah. You set yourself up. You made those choices. All I did was shine a light on them." Her cheeks flushed with anger and embarrassment, but I could see the cracks forming in her resolve. "You're just going to stand there and let this happen? This is humiliating." "Humiliating," I echoed, allowing my voice to rise slightly. "You think this is humiliating? You should have thought about that before you decided to betray our marriage. This is the reality of what you've done, not just to me but to us." Guests began murmuring amongst themselves, the tension palpable. I could feel the weight of their collective gaze. I stood my ground, refusing to show weakness. This was my moment. "Greg, please," Sarah pleaded, her voice softer now but laced with desperation. "Let's talk about this, not here." "No, Sarah, you don't get to choose when and where we talk about this anymore," I said firmly. "You chose your moment when you decided to betray me. You chose it with him." I gestured toward Jake, who stood awkwardly at the edge of the crowd, clearly taken aback by the unfolding drama. "Greg, it's not what you think," Jake interjected, trying to defuse the situation. "We were just working together." "Working together?" I scoffed. "Is that what you call it? How many times have you two shared a laugh over our life? How many late nights were spent in each other's company instead of mine?" The crowd began to murmur again, a mix of shock and empathy for my plight. It was strange to feel both powerful and vulnerable simultaneously. I could see Sarah's facade crumbling, and I knew I had her where I wanted her. "Sarah, tell them the truth," I urged, my voice almost a whisper but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Tell them what you've done." But she could only stand there, tears brimming in her eyes, the weight of guilt seemingly too much to bear. I realized then that this was more than just revenge for me. It was also about forcing her to confront the truth, not just for me, but for herself. "Just admit it," I said. "Admit that you've betrayed our vows, that you've chosen someone else over what we built together." Finally, she spoke, her voice cracking. I made a mistake, Greg. I didn't mean for it to happen this way." "Didn't mean for it to happen," I pressed. "You think this was just a small slip-up. This is a full-blown affair. You're not only hurting me, but you're also disrespecting everything we've shared." The room was silent, every eye fixed on Sarah, who now seemed to shrink under the weight of her choices. The air was thick with tension as she struggled to find her words. I thought I could be happy," she whispered, an admission that cut deeper than any sharp word. "Happy?" I echoed, feeling a mixture of anger and sadness wash over me. "Your happiness came at the expense of our marriage. You didn't even consider how your actions would affect me, did you?" The murmurs from our friends grew louder, some shaking their heads, others whispering in disbelief. I felt a sense of satisfaction in finally revealing the truth, both to myself and to the people who had witnessed our love story unfold. Then I turned to Jake. "And you, Jake, you've been with my wife under the guise of friendship. How could you manipulate her loyalty like this? How could you betray our trust?" Jake's face paled and he stammered, "I didn't mean for any of this to happen either. We were just two people at the wrong time. Spare me the excuses," I cut him off. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You were the one who took her away from me." I watched as Sarah glanced back and forth between me and Jake, the realization of the chaos she had created settling in. "Greg, I'm so sorry," she finally said, her voice breaking. "I never meant for this to hurt you. I thought I could find what I was missing." "Missing?" I interjected. "What were you missing that you thought you could find in someone else's arms?" The tears streamed down her face and she finally broke. "I don't know, Greg. I thought I was unhappy. I thought I wanted something different, but I was wrong." Too late for that, I said coldly. You have to face the consequences of your choices. The hall was filled with an uncomfortable silence, each person processing the raw emotions that hung in the air. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but there was an undeniable sense of relief in finally having said everything I needed to say. This was my revenge, my catharsis. I had exposed her betrayal publicly, forcing her to confront the truth, and in doing so I had also drawn a line in the sand. There was no turning back now. As the guests began to murmur and shift awkwardly, I turned to the DJ and signaled for him to stop the music. Let's take a break, I announced, my voice steady. I think everyone needs a moment to digest what's just happened. I felt a sense of detachment wash over me as I stepped away from the crowd, leaving Sarah standing there in her grief, the reality of her choices crashing down all around her. I had executed the plan perfectly, but now I had to figure out what would come next. The atmosphere in the banquet hall was thick with tension following my revelation. Guests were still processing what they had just witnessed, and the chatter that filled the room was a mixture of disbelief and sympathy. I could feel their eyes on me as I stood away from the crowd, uncertain about what would happen next. Sarah was still standing in the center of the room, tears streaming down her face, looking completely lost. I wanted to feel angry, to relish the vindication of having exposed her infidelity, but instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of emptiness. I had wanted her to see the consequences of her actions, but now that it was happening, a knot of sorrow twisted deep in my gut. As the guests began to leave, murmurs of concern filled the air. I overheard snippets of conversation, people trying to understand how it had all come to this. Friends I had known for years looked at me with pity, while others avoided eye contact altogether. It was strange to see the divide forming. Some were on my side, while others seemed to sympathize with her. Mark, my friend and the photographer who had helped me gather evidence, approached me cautiously. "Greg, I'm really sorry you had to go through this," he said quietly. "I had no idea it would turn into such a situation. I thought you just wanted to gather some nice shots." I nodded, not trusting my voice to say much. I appreciated his support, but it felt hollow in the wake of all that had transpired. "Thanks, Mark. I needed her to understand what she was doing." He placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did what you felt you had to do, but you need to take care of yourself now." As the last of the guests trickled out, I caught sight of Sarah still standing in the middle of the room, her body trembling. It was a stark contrast to the vibrant woman who had walked in with so much enthusiasm just hours earlier. Now she was a shell of her former self, confronted by the reality of her choices. "Greg," she choked out, finally breaking free from the trance that had held her. "Can we talk?" I hesitated. The conversation I had been preparing for was not meant to happen like this, not in front of our friends and family, not after such an explosive revelation. But I knew I owed it to her, and ultimately to myself, to have a conversation that could determine the course of our lives moving forward. "Fine," I replied, my voice steady but cool. "Let's talk." We stepped outside into the cool night air, the silence of the evening a stark contrast to the chaos we had just left behind. The stars twinkled above us, indifferent to the turmoil that had just unfolded in our lives. I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms as I faced her. "Greg, I don't even know where to start," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry. I was selfish and stupid. I thought I could find something I was missing, but I didn't think it would hurt you like this. I never meant for it to go this far. Didn't you?" I shot back, my emotions bubbling to the surface. "You were the one who chose to keep it going, to hide it from me. You didn't just slip up, Sarah. You actively engaged in a relationship with him. You made a decision every single day to betray me." "I know," she cried out, the desperation in her voice cutting through the night. "I was confused, Greg. I didn't think I was unhappy, but I wanted to feel alive again. I didn't realize how much I had taken you for granted." "Taken me for granted?" I echoed, my heart racing with a mix of anger and pain. "How could you think that being unfaithful would bring you happiness? You could have come to me, we could have worked through it together." Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to form the right words. "I didn't know how to ask for help. I thought I could handle it myself, but I was wrong. I was so wrong." "I can't just ignore what you've done," I said, my voice lowering. You have to understand that this is more than just a mistake. You don't get to erase the hurt with apologies. Trust once broken takes time to rebuild. I know, she shouted, her frustration boiling over. I'm not asking you to forgive me right now, but I need you to know that I love you. I made a terrible mistake and I can't change it, but I want to try to make it right. Her words hung in the air between us, and for a moment I felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by the reality of what she had done. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, rehearsing my responses in my mind. But nothing could prepare me for the raw emotions swirling around us now. "Do you love him?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Her gaze fell to the ground, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I don't know," she admitted, the honesty in her voice cutting deeper than any lie. "I thought I did, but now I see it was just an escape, a way to avoid facing my own feelings." "An escape," I repeated, feeling a sense of bitterness rise within me. "You chose to escape into someone else's arms instead of facing our problems together. You made that choice, Sarah." She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "I know I messed everything up and I don't expect you to understand or forgive me. I just want a chance to prove that I can be better. I want to fight for us if you'll let me." "Fight for us?" I scoffed, the words bitter on my tongue. "After everything that's just happened, how can I trust you again? How can I believe anything you say?" "I don't expect you to trust me right away," she replied, her voice steadying. "But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to show you that I'm committed to making this right. I'll go to therapy, I'll do the work. Just give me a chance." The reality of her plea hung heavy in the air. I couldn't deny that part of me still loved her, but the trust had been shattered. It was a painful realization that no amount of apologies could mend the fissure that now lay between us. "Right now, I don't know what the future holds," I said finally, my voice filled with uncertainty. "I need time to think about everything. I need to process what has happened and figure out if I can even consider a future with you after this." Sarah nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I understand. I'll give you the space you need, but please remember that I'm here, ready to fight for what we had." With that, I turned and walked away, the weight of her confession and my own feelings trailing behind me like a shadow. I felt hollow yet strangely liberated. I had executed my revenge, exposed her betrayal, and forced her to confront the consequences. But now I was left with the daunting task of figuring out what lay ahead, both for myself and for a marriage that seemed irrevocably broken. As I drove home, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. I had gained clarity, but the road ahead was winding and uncertain. Could I truly move forward, or was our relationship doomed to remain forever marred by her infidelity? I had no answers, only questions, and I had to confront them alone. The days that followed the party were a whirlwind of emotions. I found myself oscillating between anger, sadness, and confusion. Each morning I woke up to an empty side of the bed, a stark reminder of the upheaval in my life. I spent hours contemplating what I wanted for myself, for Sarah, and for our marriage. Sarah gave me space, respecting my need to process everything. She reached out occasionally, sending texts that were filled with apologies and expressions of love, but I found it hard to respond. I would stare at my phone, my heart heavy, unsure of what to say or how to respond to her pleas. The silence between us felt deafening, yet it was necessary for both of us to gather our thoughts. Then came the day when I finally decided it was time to confront my feelings. I sat down at my kitchen table with a pen and a blank notebook, determined to pour everything I had into words. Writing had always been a form of therapy for me, a way to organize my thoughts and emotions. As I began to write, the words flowed freely, reflecting the tumultuous journey I was on. I wrote about the memories we had created together, the laughter we had shared, and the love that had once felt unbreakable. But I also wrote about the pain of betrayal, the feelings of inadequacy that had crept in, and the doubts that now clouded my vision of our future. I documented my anger and sadness, but also my longing for the connection we once had. When I finished, I looked over what I had written. It was raw and honest, a testament to the love I had for Sarah, but also the hurt that had been inflicted. I realized that while I was still angry, I also missed her deeply. I longed for the companionship we had built, even if it felt like a fragile structure now. With newfound determination, I decided to reach out to Sarah. It was time for an honest conversation, one that would allow us both to get everything out in the open. I texted her, asking if she could come over that evening. The nervous energy surged through me as I waited for her response. When Sarah arrived, I could see the worry etched on her face. She stepped inside and looked around our home, which now felt more like a museum of memories than a sanctuary. I gestured for her to sit down, and we both took a moment to breathe before diving into the conversation we so desperately needed. "Greg," she started, her voice trembling, "I just want to say again how sorry I am. I've spent the last few weeks reflecting, and I know I've hurt you in ways that I can't even begin to comprehend." "I know you're sorry, Sarah," I replied, trying to keep my tone steady. "But sorry doesn't erase what you did. It doesn't change the fact that you chose to betray me." "I understand," she said softly. "I want you to know that I'm committed to making this right. I've started going to therapy to work through my own issues. I need to understand why I acted the way I did." I nodded, appreciating her willingness to seek help. "That's a good start, but we need to figure out if we can rebuild trust. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time and effort from both of us." "I'm willing to put in the work," she insisted, her eyes pleading. "I want to be better for you, for us. I can't change the past, but I want to create a new future together." Her words hung in the air, heavy yet filled with possibility. I could see the sincerity in her eyes, and it stirred something deep within me. I thought back to our history, the countless moments of joy amid the pain, and I realized that I still had love for her. It was buried beneath layers of hurt, but it was there. "Let's take it one step at a time," I said finally, my voice steady. "We need to be honest with each other moving forward. I need to know that I can trust you again, and that starts with open communication." "Absolutely," she agreed, her face lighting up with a glimmer of hope. "I want us to be transparent with each other, to share our thoughts and feelings, no matter how difficult. I won't hide anything from you again." That night, we talked for hours. We shared our fears, regrets, and hopes for the future. It was a raw and emotional conversation, but it felt like a necessary step toward healing. I found myself listening to her carefully, allowing my heart to open up just a little. There was a long road ahead, but it was a road I was willing to walk if it meant we could rebuild what had been lost. In the weeks that followed, we began to take small steps toward reconciliation. Sarah continued her therapy, and I sought my own support as well. I realized that I needed to process my feelings outside of my writing. I joined a support group for partners of infidelity, where I found solace in the stories of others who had faced similar challenges. Together, Sarah and I started to carve out time for each other, focusing on rebuilding the connection that had been strained. We went on walks in the park, cooked dinner together, and even revisited some of our favorite date spots. Each shared moment was bittersweet, a reminder of what we had almost lost, but also a chance to create new memories. Over time, I found that the walls I had built around my heart began to crumble. Sarah was making genuine efforts to change, and I started to see glimpses of the woman I had fallen in love with. It wasn't easy. There were days when doubt would creep in, and I would question if we could truly rebuild our relationship. But with every honest conversation, every moment of vulnerability, we became a little stronger. Months passed, and while we still had our struggles, I could feel a shift in our dynamic. The love we had once shared was slowly rekindling, and I found hope in the possibility of new beginnings. It was a fragile hope, but it was enough to motivate us to keep working on our relationship. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun set, I took Sarah's hand in mine. "I want to take this one day at a time," I said, "but I also want to believe that we can come out of this stronger." "I believe we can," she responded, squeezing my hand tightly. "I'm committed to doing whatever it takes to prove that to you." With that simple gesture, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. We were not out of the woods yet, but we were on the path toward healing. The journey ahead would be filled with challenges, but we were willing to face them together. As I looked out at the horizon, I realized that sometimes, from the ashes of betrayal, new beginnings could emerge. It wouldn't be easy, but with patience, trust, and love, maybe we could find our way back to each other, one step at a time. And that thought filled me with a cautious optimism I had thought lost forever.